Let's start, though, by focusing on Northern Ireland. Theresa May, the shambolic far-right British UK Prime Minister, has released a draft of her agreement with the European Union. And among other things, the agreement, which will satisfy no one, punts on the issue of an open border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. This is, of course, the mainstay of the Good Friday Agreement, which was agreed to in 1998 and brought a peace to Northern Ireland, which has been in effect for 20 years. A major part of this agreement was that the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, because of the European Union open borders policy, was essentially non-existent. It was non-existent. So that those who wanted to remain a part of Ireland, remain a part of the remain a part of the United Kingdom of the UK, could feel and stay within Northern Ireland, within the UK. Those who wanted reunification with Ireland as a whole did not have a militarized, repressive border to navigate. This agreement punts this issue, so it's not an immediate concern for sort of reigniting the troubles in Ireland, but it does point to a longer history here of imperialism, colonialism, national liberation, and socialism and supranational structures which haven't been resolved yet. Let's look at a little bit of Irish history here. Of course, people go back to the Irish potato famine, a choice of capitalism, a choice of British occupiers, no natural event that led to mass suffering and uprisings, which of course led to an abolishment of local political authorities in Ireland. This led to a growth of various Irish movements and Irish socialists, people like James Connolly, who fused together an effort at national self-determination with socialist politics. And this politics is framed usually in a United States audience as being as simple as Protestant versus Catholic. And while that's, of course, a major part of the tensions, there was also class conflict embedded from the beginning, as Protestants were accorded class privilege in line with British occupation, and the Catholics were repressed. There were various cycles of uprising, repression, and this articulation of a fusion of national liberation with socialist politics, which would parallel anti-British, anti-French, and other anti-colonial movements across the globe. In the late 60s and 70s, there would be the beginning of the Troubles, Bloody Sunday, a British massacre which killed nonviolent demonstrators, led to the emergence of a modern Irish Republican movement. Leaders like Gerry Adams and Adam McGuinness would participate in paramilitary campaigns against not only British occupying forces, but also Protestant paramilitaries, and definitely engage in actions that targeted civilians at times. There's no question about that. This movement, though, was a response to a violence that already existed and was embedded as a part of the British occupation. In the 1980s, the repression intensified under Margaret Thatcher. Fast forward to the 1990s, and a peace process began, a multi-party negotiation with unionist loyalists as well as members of the Sinn Féin, the political arm of the IRA, negotiating with Tony Blair's Labour government, led to the creation of the Good Friday Accords, which have sort of produced significant outcomes in terms of reducing the violence. During the period of the Troubles, over 3,000 people died from fighting in that particular conflict from the 70s through the 90s. The IRA decommissioned, which was getting rid of its weapons in 2005. And while there is still a huge amount of social and religious division in Ireland, this agreement, with the assistance of the transnational superstructure of the European Union, has produced significant results. And now, as Jeremy Corbyn's going to outline in this clip here, of course, that would have been threatened and still could be threatened despite this punt in the May negotiations with the EU.
Do you think in the context of British-Irish relations and Brexit, that British-Irish relations have been allowed to become damaged by Brexit?
If we pursue Brexit, which ends up with a hard border between the Republic and Northern Ireland, then quite clearly those relations are severely damaged. A lot of Irish trade is with the UK. Britain is obviously a very important trading partner with Ireland. There's massive numbers of Irish people living in Britain. There is a common travel area, which of course would be unaffected by any of this. But I do think those relations will be damaged unless we pursue a Brexit which does give us a customs union which would guarantee tariff-free trade.
The far-right parties in Ireland, including the DUP, which props up this far-right UK government, have reacted with panic and opposition to May's, what they call Theresa May's capitulation in terms of punting on the issue and keeping Northern Ireland within a customs union, which they see not only as a punt on this major part of a delicate piece, but in fact, sort of putting the Northern Irish within the Eurozone, within the European Union, one step closer to that Irish unification. Those on the left, Sinn Féin and other political parties, have seen this temporary punting as the best case scenario of a catastrophic situation in terms of what's available. But the broader struggle here is going to continue to be this reconciling of an Irish tradition of republicanism and self-determination with a socialist, class-oriented, liberatory politics that can deliver for not only the Irish people, but connect with a broader struggle against austerity across the Eurozone, and might in fact even connect with the serious socialist plans, democratic socialist plans that Jeremy Corbyn and John MacDonald have for the United Kingdom. And in that type of politics, the first thing that needs to be reaffirmed and supported in the European Union is the incredible accomplishment of open borders, while there's a common struggle and fight against the austerity, which has been implemented to police and terrorize workers across the continent, but undermined and destabilized an incredibly hard-fought peace in Northern Ireland and elsewhere across the Eurozone. I just thought it was really interesting, that Thabo and Becky clip in light for the cold open, in light of thinking of Ireland really as a colonial subject within the Eurozone, and also, which it literally is, has been historically, and also for all of the flaws and the problems of the IRA and Irish republicanism, the reality is that if you go back historically and you look at Protestant loyalist paramilitaries, they're signifying their connection with Rhodesia, apartheid South Africa, where the IRA was, as an example, I believe Jerry Adams was a pallbearer at Nelson Mandela's funeral. So they do have those global connections to liberation movements and do fit in that broader tradition. And they've sort of re-engaged somewhat in modern politics with an anti-austerity agenda.
You know, it's very interesting if you look at the history of Ireland and also even Wales, how a lot of the tactics that the British used in colonialism, for example, language laws and trying to disrupt local cultures, basically imprisoning people for speaking their local languages, were really developed in Ireland and Wales. In Wales, for example, there was a really interesting thing called the Welsh Knot, which is if a student was ever found to speak their own language, they were tied around this very heavy block around their neck, school children. And because there were such stringent rules against speaking Welsh in Wales, the only really good, because the British are so meticulous in the records that they keep, one of the few good written records of the Welsh language for the period of very serious British colonialism in Wales is through curse words, because people would curse the British people in Welsh, and it would be very, very damaging. And then, that would be written down, of course, in the legal documents. So a lot of linguists go to look at that to find developments and changes in Welsh language.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What do you got here, Matt?
So one of my favorite authors, Richard Slotkin, who writes about the mythology of sort of the American frontier.
Right.
Basically, he talks about the parallels between what happened with the Native Americans in America and the Irish, and basically Cromwell, right?
Yeah.
The English are the through line through all this. And so he writes, It is interesting to note that the adoption of similar policies by the Puritans colonizing in Ulster and on the Celtic border in Scotland, where systematic assaults were made on Celtic tribalism, native barbaric myth historians were forbidden to sing, isolated clans were exterminated, and the rest of the population was ravaged. Cromwell even attempted to establish a, quote, wild Irish reservation in Western Ireland. His brutal conquest of Ireland seems to have been conceived, in part at least, as the English equivalent of the Spanish jihads against the Indians, which Cromwell had read about in the book dedicated to him by the nephew of John Milton. So yeah, this is just this whole colonial milieu of it set deep roots, I guess we could say.
Yeah, it did. And a lot of those things were paralleled and prototyped in Ireland, and still fit, just in terms of like where these various Irish factions fit in terms of global politics. And also the, fascinating, like another place too, where when you do make a peace, how much do you have to make peace with? Because everybody has blood in their hands and everybody's done some really vicious shit. And I think that's another sort of thing, the sort of pragmatic and strategic part of me also looks at, which is like some of the debates here that get so vicious over such literally zero stakes. We can go and look at, other parallels where in order to actually establish like people no longer being kneecapped or murdered or having a significant upgrade in political representation, had to actually literally forgive and do business with people who had murdered each other, and in that case, Martin McGuinness and David Trimble, Trimble's just this horrific, totally far right, almost Pat Robertson like figure, but the truth is their ability to form a friendship and strike an agreement in Good Friday has saved a lot of lives and created a delicate balance, which was certainly an upgrade from the pure repression that existed in Catholic communities under British occupation before.
And it's it's definitely significant, and it's something that's very important for people to remember when we see this peace process just in the balance because of these Brexit negotiations and just like the utter incompetence that we've seen so far. It is something that's very frightening.
David Cameron just being like, "Oh fuck, the referendum,"
and even how much Jeremy Corbyn gets maligned in the UK press for having any just like the mildest sympathy with like the Irish struggle.
Right.
It's something that he very much just says peace is a good thing, and to have peace we need to be having dialogue with people, and it's something that we really need to make sure that we don't lose if things start to boil over. Hopefully they won't, but I mean, given the context of this Brexit debate, I don't know. It's been very frightening to watch.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and especially like I have to say, like Jeremy Corbyn, Good Friday is something that you got to give Tony Blair props for. He negotiated and quite rightly early on met with Jerry Adams and David McGuinness and had a political process. And all that Jeremy Corbyn gets smeared for is having that position like 15 years before Blair did. So this retroactive, oh no, all of a sudden that means, because of course we know what it really points to, which is that this is a guy who actually has genuine sympathy for anti-colonialist struggles globally. This is a guy who spent some time, by the way, Jeremy Corbyn, look it up, apropos of this show, spent some time, I believe, in Michael Manley's Jamaica in the 70s. That's going to have some influence on how he looks at things. And that's going to relate to Ireland as well. You just enjoyed that Michael Brooks Show video, and you can get a lot more by subscribing to us here at the Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel. It's literally right there.